Max Verstappen doesn't just brake later than other Formula One drivers, that part is obvious. But the real difference, the thing engineers quietly point out when they analyze telemetry, is how he releases the brake. Not when he hits the pedal, not how hard he presses it, how he lets it go. And here's the first question you need to think about. If brake release is so important, and if every team can see the data down to thousandths of a second, why hasn't anyone been able to copy what Max does? Why do drivers with the same cars still struggle to rotate the car the same way? And here's an even bigger question we'll answer later. Did Red Bull design their cars around Max's brake release technique? Or did Max's technique evolve because of the way Red Bull cars behave? Because once you understand how brake release controls weight transfer, front grip, rotation timing, and tire temperature all at once, you'll realize something surprising. The fastest phase of a corner isn't braking. It's what happens when braking ends. Most people think braking is about slowing the car down. In Formula One, braking is really about managing load. When a driver hits the brake pedal at 300 kilometers per hour, the car experiences massive deceleration forces. Drivers regularly see over 5G of deceleration in heavy braking zones. That force throws weight onto the front axle. The front tires compress into the asphalt. The rear goes light. Aerodynamic balance shifts forward. Ride height changes. Suspension geometry compresses, the entire car transforms in less than a second. But peak braking is not where lap time is decided. The crucial moment comes immediately after. When brake pressure begins to fall, load starts to move rearward again. If that transfer happens too quickly, the front loses grip before the car has rotated. If it happens too slowly, the rear becomes unstable and snaps. This transition phase is called brake release, and Verstappen operates in this phase differently than almost anyone else. Telemetry traces often show that most drivers release the brake in a relatively simple curve. They hit peak pressure, hold briefly, then release in a smooth downward slope as steering input increases. Verstappen's trace looks different. Instead of a simple slope, his release curve often shows a long controlled taper with subtle plateaus. He maintains residual brake pressure deeper into the corner than most drivers. That small amount of remaining brake load keeps weight on the front axle just long enough to maximize rotation. Engineers sometimes describe this as holding the nose down. It's not dramatic, often only a few percent of brake pressure, but that small percentage keeps the front tires operating near peak grip while steering input increases. The result is earlier rotation toward the apex. Here's the second question you should think about. If the difference is only a few percent of brake pressure, how can that produce such a large performance advantage? The answer lies in weight transfer timing. A Formula One tire generates maximum grip within a narrow vertical load range. Too little load and the tire slides, too much load and the tire overheats. Verstappen times brake release so that peak front grip occurs exactly when steering load peaks. That synchronization allows him to rotate the car earlier than rivals. Early rotation shortens the path to the apex. A shorter path means earlier throttle. Earlier throttle means higher exit speed. Over a lap, those small gains accumulate into tenths. Brake release also influences rear stability. When the brake pedal is released suddenly, rear load increases rapidly, which sounds beneficial. But if the rear regains load before the front has fully rotated the car, understeer occurs. Drivers then add more steering input, increasing slip angle and tire temperature. Verstappen avoids this by releasing the brake gradually enough that rotation completes before rear load fully stabilizes. The rear follows the front rather than resisting it. This is controlled instability, the state where the car rotates aggressively but remains predictable. Many drivers either stabilize too early or destabilize too much. Verstappen lives precisely between those extremes. Another factor is brake-by-wire behavior. Modern Formula One cars use electronic brake distribution systems that blend hydraulic braking with energy recovery from the MGK. Under braking, the rear axle often contributes to energy harvesting, which effectively creates braking torque. The balance between mechanical braking and electrical harvesting affects rear stability. Verstappen adapts his release curve to match harvesting behavior. When harvesting levels are high, rear stability decreases. Maintaining slight brake pressure keeps front load high and reduces the chance of rear snap. This level of coordination between pedal input and system behavior is extremely difficult to learn because harvesting levels vary corner by corner and lap by lap. This brings us back to the earlier question: why can't other drivers copy this? On paper, they should be able to. Teams record brake pressure traces with extreme precision. Engineers can overlay data and show exactly where Verstappen maintains pressure longer or releases more gradually. But copying data is not the same as internalizing timing. Brake release happens in fractions of a second while the driver is simultaneously steering, modulating throttle, and managing balance. Muscle memory built over years determines how naturally a driver can hold the brake at the edge of grip. Verstappen developed this instinct early in karting, where maintaining front load during rotation is essential. That instinct transferred into single-seaters and eventually Formula One. Here's another curiosity question that we'll answer shortly. Is Verstappen's brake release technique only effective because Red Bull cars are designed to respond to it? Red Bull's recent designs have emphasized strong front-end response with a rear that can feel nervous under entry. Sergio Perez repeatedly described difficulty with front grip consistency and entry stability. Verstappen, however, extracts performance from that behavior. By maintaining front load longer through brake release, he activates the car's strongest characteristic, front bite. In this sense, the car rewards his technique. But the relationship goes both ways. Engineers design around the driver's feedback. Over time, Red Bull refined suspension geometry, anti-dive characteristics, and aero balance to complement Verstappen's entry style. Brake release also affects tyre temperature. Every time a tyre slides under braking or steering, friction generates heat. If brake release is abrupt, front tyres experience a sudden drop in vertical load, forcing them to slide more as steering input increases. Sliding creates surface temperature spikes. Verstappen's gradual release keeps vertical load stable, reducing sliding and heat spikes. Lower heat spikes mean slower degradation over long stints. This is why aggressive entry speed does not necessarily destroy his tyres the way many expect. Another technical layer involves steering timing. Telemetry overlays often show Verstappen beginning steering input slightly earlier than rivals. That early steering works only because brake release maintains front grip. Without that grip, early steering would produce understeer. His technique essentially creates a window where steering and braking overlap longer than usual. Engineers refer to this as maximizing the trail braking phase. Trail braking is the process of carrying brake pressure into the corner while steering. Verstappen extends this phase more than most drivers. Now we arrive at another key question. Does this technique become even more important in the future? The 2026 regulations introduce significant changes. Power units will rely more heavily on electrical deployment, with roughly half the total power coming from electric sources. The removal of the MGU-H changes turbo behavior and energy recovery dynamics. Brake-by-wire calibration will change accordingly. Rear axle harvesting torque may vary more significantly depending on energy strategy. That means braking stability could fluctuate more than it does today. Active aerodynamics introduce another variable. Front and rear wings will shift between drag reduction and high downforce modes. During braking, aero loads will transition rapidly as the car slows. If front downforce rises faster than rear downforce, the car becomes more rotation prone. If the rear regains load later than expected, instability increases. Drivers will need extremely precise brake release timing to synchronize mechanical load transfer with aerodynamic load transfer. Verstappen's sensitivity to that timing could become even more valuable. But there is also a counter-argument. Lighter cars, with target weight reductions around 30 kilograms, reduce inertia. Lower inertia allows faster directional change, but also narrows stability margins. Brake release errors will be punished more quickly. A technique that depends on operating near the edge becomes riskier. The question becomes whether Verstappen's precision continues to offset that risk. Another aspect of 2026 is torque delivery. Increased electric power means instant torque spikes on exit. Drivers who rotate the car early must manage torque carefully to avoid overheating rear tires. Verstappen's early rotation pairs naturally with progressive throttle application, but the balance between entry rotation and exit torque will become even more delicate. Let's return to the earlier question about Red Bull's design philosophy. Did the car shape the driver, or did the driver shape the car? The answer appears to be both. Early in his Red Bull career, Verstappen adapted to cars that rotated aggressively. Engineers noticed he could exploit that rotation more effectively than teammates. Development paths began favoring stronger front response. Over several seasons, this feedback loop intensified. By the ground effect era beginning in 2022, the car-driver combination had reached extraordinary synergy. Brake release timing is part of that synergy. Suspension kinematics influence how load transfers during braking. Anti-dive geometry controls how much the front suspension compresses under deceleration. Aerodynamic platform stability determines how consistent front downforce remains as ride height changes. All of these factors influence how effective a driver's brake release technique becomes. Verstappen's feedback allowed engineers to tune these characteristics more precisely. But none of that explains the final piece: consistency. Many drivers can produce one lap with perfect brake release timing. Verstappen does it lap after lap. Consistency is what converts technique into championship advantage. Over a race distance, small entry speed gains accumulate. Consistent tire temperatures maintain grip. Predictable rotation reduces mistakes. The entire performance envelope becomes stable. Now we reach the final major question we introduced at the beginning. Why is brake release more important than braking itself? Because braking determines how much speed you lose, but brake release determines how efficiently you convert that lost speed into corner rotation. Two drivers may slow to the same minimum speed, but the one who rotates earlier reaches full throttle sooner. That difference defines lap time. And this is why engineers pay so much attention to brake release traces. When they overlay data between drivers, differences often appear small in absolute terms, but large in effect. A few hundredths of a second earlier rotation translates into meters gained on exit. Over multiple corners, those meters accumulate into tenths. Looking toward 2026, brake release may become one of the most critical skills again. Active aero transitions, variable harvesting torque, lighter chassis, and new tyre constructions will all interact with load transfer timing. Drivers who sense those transitions most precisely will gain the advantage. Verstappen's career suggests he excels at sensing load changes through the chassis. So now let me ask you something. If every team can see Verstappen's brake traces, if engineers can measure his release curves, if simulators can model ideal timing, why do rivals still struggle to match his entry speed and rotation? Is it pure talent? Is it instinct built over years? Or is it the rare ability to operate exactly at the edge of grip without crossing it? Comment below. Is Max Verstappen's brake release technique the biggest hidden advantage in modern Formula One? Or will the 2026 regulations change the physics enough to neutralize it? And if you enjoy deep technical breakdowns like this, subscribe now, because when 2026 testing begins, we'll analyze exactly how braking behavior changes and which drivers adapt fastest. Because the next era of Formula One might not be decided by engines or aerodynamics alone. It might be decided by how drivers release the brake.